Good morning. I don't know if the microphone's working. So, good morning or good day, good evening, good night, depending on when you're watching this. Yes. So, lots on my mind this morning in a very nice way. I actually last couple days felt really terrible, and now I feel I'm back. And one thing, two things actually, as it relates to Parinama method is, in the, standalone videos, one of the initial, like, sort of, I guess, like standalone topics that didn't make it into TPM for beginners, and I don't think it really belongs in there, but it's, it's really about like changing the relationship with feeling like shit. Um, Like, with feeling terrible, and I'm not gonna get into that here, but that, like, having sort of curiosity and patience and yeah, having curiosity and patience with, like, bad feelings and bringing some larger contextual awareness to, like, that it'll pass and even, to be in it and just be, like, to kind of be able to view it in a sense of, like, be sort of an observer and sort of find some peace in it. Because the thing about feeling terrible is a lot of the disruption in it is, like, kind of created it's kind of like second arrow stuff where it's like it's the reaction to it versus just kind of the arising awfulness. You know, and so today we're gonna read about pattern recognition versus emotional literacy in the sixth hub. Um, so I'm gonna get to that. It's gonna get to that at some point. But the other part of this is, and yesterday I did a special installment of dealing with enemies. Watch it if you care to. I was feeling terrible, but I'm really careful about not like using people's names unless I've actually had a conversation with them about it. But I will say that this came from, I just want to make a point of how much I really enjoy people pointing things out that they think I'm coming up short with, or adding a perspective really adds to my own experience with this because it makes me think. One of the things is like the talking here, it's like I'll make myself think, but it's like much better if somebody says, here's a completely like different hot take on this. So, and the hot take had been, yeah, but what if, like we're talking about like transforming like these notions of projection, but it's like, what if people are really coming for you? Which is, I love that as a counterpoint to this, and I get into it. I won't get into it here. But the other part of this, I want to talk about, like, the first thing is like changing relationship with like difficult feelings. Um, and could be like a whole like module, but just seeding the notion that it's like being miserable is a state that you can like kind of like occupy with a certain level of comfort, which is nuts. It takes time, but like it's like by little bits, by just experiencing with like little moments of being like, let me just kind of look at these bad feelings, and it's kind of like give myself what I need in it without trying to like shut myself up, by being like, how do we shift ourselves out of this immediately? It's like, it's kind of like, okay, like what's the thing? And then being present with yourself in a particular way, and then offering, comfort to the extent that you can. Um, so with that, the other part, and this relates to dealing with enemies, is a lot of just overall, what Parinama is an organizing principle. And by organizing, by functioning is like something that is like organizing. I'm going to repeat the word. Um, we're kind of compartmentalizing and beginning to manage things. It's like I mean, it sounds like kind of unlike, like ethereal and mystical, but it's practical. It's practical. It's a practical and philosophical guide. Um, See, it's practical and philosophical. See, it says it. It's not made up. Is that so? One of the things that I'm just going to kind of point to is that, like, overwhelm and kind of like feeling like destabilized and overtaken by situation, by kind of whatever's arising in yourself in terms of, like, it's like something's activating us or like whatever. Um, and even this process of self-actualization is, instead of just taking things, um, like one of the things right now, like, with social media, there's a lot of, like, really, like, kind of enjoyable content about mental health and stuff, and there's a lot of it. It's a lot, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like being fed an idea that resonates and being like, "Wow, that's kinda like help me right now." Like, if someone's like, "Oh, here's some 5 tips for dealing with, anxiety," or, something to think about, in terms of like dysfunctional family structures or whatever, that, it's like, okay. And I think one of the things is with that is it really is it's a it, it's challenged as far as creating any type of, like, a sustained evolution, because it supports, like, the comfort. It's comfort, which is it's an comfort matters. It's not discrediting comfort. But when we're talking about what Parinama method is a way to actually kind of reconcile the facets of ourselves, and actually, even when we're intaking information, that we can contextualize it and sort of land it in a place and kind of work with it within a broader context. So, and tying it to the reflexes, tying it to the beliefs, tying it to the emotion, tying it to, the behavior, the and therefore being able to kind of really sort of start steering towards, um, a state of greater aliveness, of sustain, like a kind of a state that's, like, to a certain extent, gaining some yardage in terms of just accessing the depths of aliveness. I just happiness is kind of like, I don't know. It's kinda like the closest thing I'd say is joy, but it's like an expansive feeling of just feeling alive in moments, and then to go full circle, which is that it's like the feelings of, comfort with feeling terrible, like, to the extent that you can, like, growing that capacity is kind of like expanding the aperture. I love that my cat just loves any spot that I've been sitting in recently. I'm, like, really oddly, like, weirdly sort of, like, feel really proud of that. It's, like, makes you feel really loved. It's like he's so into me. I'm a little bit attached to my cat. Um, a lot of it attached. So, okay. So just some thoughts. Thoughts. Lots of them. Okay. So let's read. And okay, so the point, I guess maybe a point I want to make is that I really welcome, um, any thoughts and, um, like, contextualizing saying like, "Hey, I think you're missing the mark on this," or like, "Here's my thoughts on this. This really resonated with me. I really like that. That mattered for me." It just helps. It helps me in my own process, and it makes this the two-way street that I aspire for this to be, in terms of it being about all of us, both of us. Like, that this isn't, you know, the pulpit. It's a really, like, it really is an old model, the model that the of authority, that's infallible, and it's bad for everyone involved. Like, the thing is that, and most people who are seeking to have this kind of authority have never held it. Maybe they've held it as like, but like, and one of the problems with being given like infallible authority is, without checks and balances, and, having experienced that, it's actually a little bit scary. It should be. And in order to deal with that fear, it's like they're doubling down on like certainty, which actually makes a person more dangerous. It's kind of a kind of more complex thing, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, the problem with it is, like, to believe that the reason that you have your position of, of respect, or, like, your relative position of being listened to, is because you do have all the answers. It's like this old model that has never actually existed. As revisited earlier in the or visited earlier in the book, the notion that, like, parents giving out consequences is like this ultimate, like, knowingness, where it's like you realize as an adult, it's like they're just kind of taking their best shot at it. So it doesn't really exist. It's like, it's kind of, you know, in like the full sense of like ultimate authority. I think there's like very high levels of responsibility that exist, but the pressure, when it's like the idea is that, to hold this position, I have to know everything, it winds up being really bad for people, myself included, having been in the position. Um, and it's really hard to figure out how to get out of it when you're in it without like shattering some aspect of the situation in a way that's like, can be negative. Anyhow, enough chat. Let's read. Okay, pattern recognition versus emotional literacy. It's like a really nice overcast day here. So I discuss in chapter 5 how the interruption, chapter 5 is the second hub. I mean, come on. Okay, I discuss in chapter 5 how the interruption and underdevelopment of emotional literacy in the second hub can lead to enhanced pattern recognition, intuition. An infant or young child trying to make sense of an unstable environment can develop heightened pattern recognition at the cost of connection to bodily sensation and gut feel. In early years, the energy that could be supporting lower hub development gets repurposed into higher hubs before the nervous system is developmentally ready. The notion of an unusually perceptive child as a so-called old soul is a rationalization often used to make sense of a survival adaptation. Mm-hmm. That one gets a little beat to take in. We may learn at an early age to detect minute movements and changes in our environment as precursors to behavior of our parent or other people in our home. For example, a slow, deep inhale from our mother may signal that she is about to get angry, and it gives us a heads up that it's time to leave the room. These behaviors can register in the subconscious and can signal to a child that something is about to happen before it does. As we grow older, this capability becomes increasingly sophisticated. Because intuition relies on the experience library we've built, some junk from the cultural program that surrounds us has to be captured. Part of our so called gut feel about a person can and often does include dehumanizing cultural standards. Yeah. Awareness is a powerful tool against this fallibility. It's interesting that I used that word and I was just using it. Yeah, I mean, one thing with intuition that's developed in this particular way is that it has more fallibility against concepts that are, like notions of danger of people being able to be incorporated into our notion of like intuition without, it's like, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. I think it's self-explanatory. The following section reviews cognitive biases and how together intuition and conscious intellectual capacity are necessary to avoid causing harm unintentionally. Cognitive dissonance is the intensity that occurs from the collision between subconsciously held reflexes and who we consciously believe ourselves to be. Once again, cognitive dissonance is the intensity that occurs from the collision between subconsciously held reflexes and who we consciously believe ourselves to be. Many social conditions we consider dangerous or distasteful are, to be to a considerable extent, subjective, with elaborate rationalizations going into justifying the associated reflexes we have about them. Yes, I'm talking about racism. And the reason I'm not specifically calling it out in the book is that I wrote and read and studied a lot about racism, but was very mindful not to position myself as a racism educator. Very, very important in my own process, and I was doing some of it this week, which is to listen to folks who are experiencing the distress and the anger of being marginalized and hearing it, like activating the empathy. And this goes back to look. This is why Sixth Hub, look, it's like humanize oneself. And how, for me, sitting and listening and shutting the fuck up as a white woman who really doesn't like to shut the fuck up, to sit and like really be present in that and allow the discomfort to like really exist and grow and to just really like see it. Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. I really don't, um like one of the things that I would say it's really like about like anti-racist work is that if it feels satisfying for a white person, it's like you're doing it wrong. If it feels like, see, I'm one of the good ones, it feels like, oh my gosh, see, I'm one of the ones who's doing the hard work. It's not it. It's not it. It is a very fucking sad. It is like the analogy that I would use would be along the lines of you're like walking it, it's like you're feeling like Cinderella and realizing like, oh my God, I'm one of the stepsisters. It's like I'm not the I'm the in this narrative, I cause harm. In this narrative, I cause harm unintentionally. Um, but do. And the unintentional part is the part that needs to be woken up. Because it's like, well, I didn't mean to. It's like, God damn, I didn't mean to. Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's like, I didn't mean to, so now why are you being mean to me? It's like, okay. And this is why, like, in a lot of this, like what we're dealing with is like, it's kind of, almost like a reparenting manual where we're growing like our capacity for maturation. And, back to even handling difficult emotions. I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to jump back in here. So, to help us survive, our brains evolved to make strong impressions of what puts us in danger. Our primitive predecessors, who were good at remembering which plants tasted delicious, were good at remembering which plants oh, reading my eyeballs. Okay, our primitive predecessors, who were good at remembering which plants tasted delicious, were outlived by our ancestors who could remember to avoid the poisonous ones. The pessimistic inclination to magnify attention on the poisonous plant led to survival and eventually became passed down information. In the spirit of paradox, the hypervigilance for survival that made our current physical existence possible is now killing us with maladaptive chronic stress responses. And in the sixth hub, where we create meaning, the wires can cross to rationalize maladaptive socialization as a survival reflex. And yes, I'm talking about like racism. Racism, very specifically. Yeah. And pointing to the thing of, like, things, it's like this Venn diagram, and I'm actually gonna, like, not educate actually on this, so I'm gonna stop myself. I'm gonna point out the thing is that, um, there's a tremendous amount of, like, extraordinary work done, and, I'm not one of the people that's done it, and if I did, it wouldn't be appropriate. It's nuts. I mean, it's really nuts that it's like, if you think about, like, one of the best ways to even see it in oneself is to see, like, I really only wanna hear about this from another white person. They can help me make sense of this, and it's like, good lord. Yeah. And, I mean, there is a place for shame in this. Like, and this is one of the things where it's like, as far as, like the chronic shame of like, oh, there's just something fundamentally wrong with me, where it's like, well, an arising sense of being part of something that's cruel without even being willing to look at it and evaluate, our, one's own participation in it, and is, it's interesting, yeah, there's that. So, and, stay tuned. We're going to talk about biases. And I will tell you that a lot of this came up very, in this process of how this book sort of arrived in the world. Just that these things like arose, like where it was just like, sort of downloads where it was like, oh, that's a thing. That's a thing. And there were times where I'd be like, oh, I don't want this to do write about this. But there was just a sense that's like, yeah, this fits in with it, or just I don't know. I don't know. Someday I'll talk more about like whatever I think it is. But okay, pattern recognition versus emotional literacy. One of the things I'm going to say is like how this shows up is when is like, so one of the ways is to notice it's like, oh, I'm very perceptive about other people, but I can't really rely on my own like reads on people. So I can like see other people very like I can see their interactions. I'm very, to be very perceptive. And then when it comes to one's own track record, about being able to evaluate their own situations and circumstances and trust their own sensibilities in their relationships and interactions, personal, intimate, and close interactions with people, when those feel very like labored and confusing, it can feel like there's this thing where it's like these two things, like, what's wrong with me? This is like a what's wrong in it, that where it's like this is a hub thing, which is that second hub development, is very listen, it's really about that, the second hub, that time of life, and having attunement, being taught our inner emotional library in a way that's like very which is like teaching that it's like it's mirrored by the outside world, and being taught what those emotions are. Now kids are being taught that. There's like more of an emphasis on that, and think, like, which is extraordinary. But I think the one thing I just want to point out here is this point, which is like to see is if this is something that is experienced, is to kind of to look at that and understand that that ultimately is about like further development with the second hub, is to go back into the second hub. And even doing the exercises in chapter 11 that we'll get to, that have to do with when there's feeling, and there's just a lot of feeling and overwhelm, is to use tools like journaling and the specific journaling practices and prompts in there that are about like just looking at the feeling and drawing them out, and also the techniques and exercises in chapter 5, the emo wheel, which is organized by hub, by the way. But so one thing I'll say that is happening right now in the book, and it's interesting because I'm not going to talk more on it, I think, or I might, we'll see. Where I'm like, I think we're gonna wrap this up 20 minutes later. Is the kind of the beginning of like the evidence of this starting to fold in on itself, and it's in ways that are in the practice, actually. And there's a little bit of this where we're seeing the kind of turnaround, where we're starting to see how the upper hubs relate to the lower hubs, and even how the book is constructed, which I've talked about in earlier chapters, which is like part 1, chapters 1, 2, 3 map to parts 1, 2, 3 in the book, and that it's kind of like an unfolding that sort of doesn't necessarily end, that you can continue. There's in the 13 chapters, that the end of the book actually kind of in a way ends at the beginning of it, which we'll discuss when we get there. But one of the things I want to talk about in terms of that folding in is about, so, in popular culture, one of the things I love TikTok. I love my TikTok, is that you have like young kids, and you have a lot of, sort of like abundance culture mindset stuff, which is like, look away from the stuff that you don't want. Which is, it's like, listen, like everything, all truth contains paradox. It's like, yeah, you don't want to spend a lot of time like being ungrateful. I think being ungrateful is very problematic for bringing more good things into your life. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, just look at it. It's like one of those things where it's just like, just even feel it in yourself when you're around people that aren't grateful, and just imagine that that's sort of the universal sort of like recoil of like oof. It's really like a very, I have something right now in my life where I'm watching somebody do it, and I'm like, oh, it's just like a spiral. Like you're really, it's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Doesn't get you what you think it's going to get or whatever. I don't know. Like, but the thing is, okay, so the point here is that it's like, okay, so earlier in the book in part 1, it's either in chapter 1 or 3. I think it's in 1. Some really good stuff in chapter 1. It's a short chapter. It has some, I was looking through it this morning. That there's these kind of two predominant loves within us that are complementary opposites. And one of them is the love that exists within our physical body in terms that exists, that shows up in the form of self-preservation. And the other is the love, and so we'll talk, that's kind of like maybe like lower hub inclinations, first hub inclinations. And then there's another love, which could theoretically be considered like the seventh hub, like sort of dominant or whatever, which is this love for your destiny and your creativity and higher aspects of your actualization. And so the lower hub's physical safety is diametrically opposed to taking risks. It believes it is. It believes it is. Whether it is or not, a whole other story. It's not. It's not. It's not, but whatever. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that's not, because like that just me whispering that into a microphone does not change does not change what we're reconciling with, which is that part of what we're doing here is that we're yoking everyone together to like walk in the same direction. And in order to do that, everyone needs to believe in the plan. So if it's like, you know what, fear of like my physical demise, which would end the whole thing, it's not stupid. If you die, the whole destiny thing evaporates into whatever other form it's going to take. So the intelligence of that is real. And it's the love of it is real. Then the whole kind of aspect of like this destiny, this purpose, this creation. It's like, what is this thing that calls me? It's sort of, like that, like it's like taking out it's removal, it's moving off the understood path of safety. So I'm going full circle with this to say that there, in like the sort of abundance culture, the idea is like, if you're feeling fear, oh, it's so dumb, and like, don't think about it, because that's going to make things real. Like, one of the things is like the things you think about are going to like conjure up more of it, which is once again like true and not true, because it's like, it's the emotion, and it's the emotion of it that's the potent part. And without the ability in the second hub to have capacity for strong emotions and not to be overtaken by them, and not to like, to be able to compartmentalize them and be like, oh, this is a strong emotion about this thing, and it's about my survival. Like, oh, this might be getting a little too esoteric, so I'm going to try to kind of tighten it up. So the point, so maybe like the tighten up here is that it's like, part of what we need, is like a reconciliation, a reclamation here, is in order for what we're going to even get into here, because a lot of where we go now is into this like upper domain, is like an establishment of trust with ourselves, and like specifically the first hub of trust, of that you do respect your physical security, that you're not tied into it, like, but that you do have it under consideration, that it will not be ignored, that it will be respected, it will be attended to. It's not going to be, you're not going to be abandoned. It's like, I'm staying with you. This is something that matters. But I'm not, but like the thing about fear driving that, the fear, I think for me, it's like the fear is diminished the more I, with a level-headed approach, say, listen, it doesn't matter how much we stockpile, like, the tsunami can come. But the thing is, there is a plan, there is a consideration, there is a notion about the importance of physical safety and security and trusting myself, like that exists. I'm not abandoning that. And not being afraid of those thoughts and those feelings, and just being like, yep, this is part of the thing. They actually kind of go away, like almost entirely, by the way, but if they're handled in a particular way. But it's making room for what's to come. And this is kind of the full circling here, which is that this shows up as far as like kind of balancing this, because if we don't have this kind of first hub reconciliation, it's going to pull against everything that comes after this, which is about sort of ascension, ideation, like sort of destiny, or whatever you want to call it, of creation, because it's just, it loves you a lot. It doesn't want to see you get hurt. So it's like, and so it's kind of, but it is you. And this is the unification where it's like, it's like, I can trust, it's like the trust. So yeah, it's pretty esoteric. So just take what you want out of it. Okay. All right. Okay. We did it. So tomorrow, or whenever the next time I read, which is likely tomorrow, the shadows, denial, illusion, delusion, and bias. So yeah. Okay. Any thoughts you have on this, I would love to hear. So in the comments, fantastic. I love it. If you don't feel comfortable putting your thoughts in the comments, you don't have my, you can't contact me directly, you can go to the Parinama Method on Instagram and DM me if you want to say something. I'd love to hear it. I am very appreciative of any and all feedback. And I will say, one of the things that is remains consistent, is that if you bring something up, it is never isolated. I can say the N word. It is never like it usually is like this string where it's like, boop, okay, that's the whole thing. Like, other people have been saying this, like similar to the thing of like, but what if there are enemies? And I was like, yeah, this week a lot. It's just like it's been coming up a lot, and like that in other conversations, and also, as I mentioned in that installment, which is like, it's one of the most common things that people come to me with, as far as asking me for like what I would call like acute, like, I need some help to figure this out right now. And this isn't like emergency. This isn't the ER. This is kind of like like, I don't know, ongoing care, wellness. It's wellness optimization. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. So there's that. So I just want, like, as far as an encouragement, it's like, if you're like, yeah, I'm pointing something out and I don't want to be a jerk about it, it's like, I don't really, like, look, if I took it personally, all of this would be for naught. Can you, I mean, that'd be really funny if I was like really enraged and like struck back, you come at me with something and I'm like, take it like personally. just into the trash. I'd be so full of shit. Really, truly. Yeah. And if it is personal, sometimes people, or like, if it is, I'm not gonna say personal, but if it's like intent is just kind of like to, with no, back to like this, also back to the the last video, which is that if, you know, if it seems like, wow, how am I so good at figuring out whether someone has like is like destructive or constructive in their um dissension, criticism, critique, whatever, it's when I can tell that there's no end game. Like when I can like track, it's like they don't really want anything other than to like try to, just, like set the world on fire. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes that's like it actually is like pointing something out that's interesting to explore. But that or when I'm sensing the end game is something where they're just like their enjoyment would be just it's like oppositional defiant disorder where there's like a like there's a thing where it's like yeah, I just want to fight anything that's put in front of me and discredit it, which is like a whole thing. But the thing is when you have it in yourself, that's very activating. Like so when people like it's very once again, here we go. Okay. We did it. We did it. We did it. This time I'm gonna say we really did it. Um, yeah, I'm really grateful for you. I'm really grateful for you. It means so much to me. It means so much to me to be met here on this and in any way. And I will say that I get tremendous benefit out of this just by doing it. Um, but the experience of being met in this is like absolutely extraordinary. And it is like, special shout out. I'm gonna give special shout outs to, in this case, to Mira. Special shout out to Kristen, and others who I'm not going to shout out. You have to do some more comments. Oh, that gets a dong. Okay. All right. So anyway, thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.